But what kind of sickness? 273 says every story I hear makes me glad that I live far away from any of them. Stormy says I don't know. Maybe it's just weak because it's been having to block out, like 1,000 billion other bad things. Capacheetle says yell if you need anything. Thistle says seems I'm doing house calls now, Buttercup. Thistle says must admit I'm rather proud. Capacheetle says oh god I forgot I have an eyeball in my pock. Band-Aids says, eyeball. Capacheetle says Katie is a slime UWU says there has been a lot happening. Stormy says, don't keep that there. Capacheetle says yeah. Smiley face, I appreciate it. Matto521 says I do the same thing honestly, I just stay in my basement half the time. Hissing Cat says, eyeball. Capacheetle says eyeball in my pocket. Thistle says I'm proud of you too, you know. Matto521 says and the other half of the time I just leave town for a while. Capacheetle says SNF. Thistle says you saw a situation you weren't sure you could handle, and you called for help. Stormy says I'm not real good with plants though. Thistle says I know that's not easy for you. Capacheetle says well I mean haha. I know I'm not good at comfort. Fallout says oh, hiya. 273 says that does not seem to work for long, though. Capacheetle says I care about slime apple but that doesn't make me better at words. Matto521 says never does. Mist Heart 101 says oh. Capacheetle says he was also smoking. Mist Heart 101 says hey Jester. Thistle says you tried, so it's a start, frankly. Oracle says, IBRB my arm hurty Mist Heart 101 says don't kitty dance in my house please. Thistle says, I have like 6 cookies from Band-Aids. Lodge 80 says lean //. Capacheetle says oh the nether cookies. 273 says even stepping foot near civilization has you at risk for something, doesn't it? Even sleeping on a bench one night led me to being dragged to a beach party. Capacheetle says they're real good. Fallout says, I just said mist is going to kill you and Serpy says I gotta get out of here. Capacheetle says I think they're different from the ones I had back home but I just didn't have imps back home. Capacheetle says so that's probably why. Thistle says anyway, going to let Slime Apple sleep now. Matto521 says well don't sleep on a bench in public then Sherlock. Stormy says I mean it doesn't. Stormy says look sick. Mist Heart 101 says I think I'm just gonna fucking lay down. Thistle says honestly I'm so glad to see Doll just sitting around again. Capacheetle says skulk dogs eat this eyeball. ___ says sorry for all of the horrors. Enjoy the cakes. Maybe they will make you feel better? Katie is a slime UWU says maybe the source has just gotten too strong for it. Capacheetle says it is nice. Stormy says maybe. I thought the sauce was weaker now, though. Thistle says going to go sit in the grass. Capacheetle says it's time for me mandated Buttercup floor time. Fallout says we'll get out of here then. Good rests. 273 says I was stuck at a station after an urgent call from a friend led me to there. Crow says Thistle. Mist Heart 101 says have a good rest of y'all stays. Thistle says, keep an eye on Buttercup for me, would you? Mars says LMAO. Hissing Cat says, 07. Thistle says yes. Crow says oh, I will. Mist Heart 101 says I'm gonna try and keep together. Crow says I think something is wrong with me. 273 says even if I chose to ride the train, I am unsure how long I could travel before I shut down entirely. Stormy says freezy. Do you remember much about the dream? Crow says, BTW is the ghost. Thistle says wrong how, exactly. KD is a slime UWU says it's been slowly coming back. Crow says I keep knowing. Crow says things I can't, and shouldn't. Matto521 says and so you got kidnapped after shutting down? Did you just hope that someone would have a charger on them and not gut you for parts? Stormy says I still only have fragments, and the things Mortis has told me. One thing I do remember really well though. Crow says things from back home. Thistle says you may be perhaps a seer of sorts, though I am unsure of what kind. Crow says that, seems like it may be the case. Thistle says if you'd like, leave me letters in my mail and I will try to make sense of what's happening to you as best I can. Thistle says if that works. Crow says thank you. Thistle says I have a few other folks I have such correspondence with, like Shanks. Stormy says it's when you died. I don't think I'd ever felt as pained as I did then. Because of all the things that happened, that was something we could have prevented. Crow says I want you to have this. KD is a slime UWU says. 273 says I was simply reserving what I had left at the time. I had plans to ask to be led somewhere, but I never found the right time. Thistle says. Interesting. Crow says it manifested recently. Matto521 says well it seems like other people found a time for you. Thistle says manifested how, exactly? Stormy says if we'd just been a little more careful with the anagram, if I'd stayed closer by your side, it wouldn't have happened. KD is a slime UWU says I. Crow says it grew in the core of my form. Thistle says Crow says and it felt. Crow says wrong. Stormy says I know it's egotistical of me to think I could have helped but. Crow says like an itch. Crow says an itch of the soul. Crow says so I took it out. Thistle says an itchy soul sounds really kind of unpleasant. 273 says I suppose so. After all that happened there, I fled into the woods. Thankfully, I was able to speak to someone I could trust with my location. Crow says. 273 says that is how I was led here. Thistle says but I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that. KD is a slime UWU says the scariest part of when I died was right at the end. When my memory finally fully came back. Matto521 says so Carnation led you here after all that? 273 says Carnation? Stormy says memories her. Thistle says. Sorry I'm a little tired. I'll think on it further. Thank you for trusting me with this. 273 says no. My friend Lily. Matto521 says yeah, you talked about I see. Crow says thank you, Thistle. KD is a slime UWU says finally remembering everybody right as I was leaving them. Stormy says, sad face. Matto521 says wait Lily as in peace Lily? Stormy says that shouldn't have to happen to anyone. 273 says yes, that one. I assume you know of him. Thistle says I'll be around if you need me, of course. Mist Heart 101 says, I am going to go to bed. Stormy says, night. Thistle says hello band-aids. Mist Heart 101 says, good night folks, don't make my mistakes of shooting an angel in the face. Triple X says, Slime Apple will be in the saloon room for the rest of the night if anyone wants to interact with him. Katie is a slime UWU says, GN. Kissing Cat says, GN. Thistle says do you want some more cider? Band-Aid says hot. That would be nice. Matto521 says I got an application from them for the cafe I just opened. I hired them cause they seem to have good experience with talking to people, but we haven't done orientation. Matto521 says but they let you here? Thistle says would you like some too, Sid? Sid says oh, please. Stormy says I got a card reading from Luce, you know what I got. 8 of Cups. Thistle says. And Glunkus is a meat person. Do you want anything? Sid says thank you. Katie is a slime UWU says Glunkus is what? Glunkus says I would like something. Sid says I just heard the news about Mist. Glunkus says the cider perhaps. Sid says I knew that Angel was a dick. Stormy says he said it meant something was holding me back from getting my memories. A barrier in the way. I think I'm scared of remembering how much it hurt. It's easier to just let Morty deal with all the icky stuff, but that's not super fair to him, is it? 273 says I see. They did, and I must thank them for that. They have been quite kind to me during my time here. Hissing Cat says, I found diamond armor and 2 bottles on the ground. Glunkus says thank you, smiley face. Thistle says heat it up by the fire for a bit, if you'd like. Hissing Cat says, in front of the honeycomb. Thistle says hug hello, little crow. Thistle says I just need to sit for a moment. Corvoraptor says hi. Matto521 says HM. Well, I'll probably talk to them about this then. Glunkus says, this is a different character BTW, I just have a tier 1 sub. Sid says oh, hey start. Sid says start. Start. Katie is a slime UWU says when Beryl created FR33ZY she wanted nothing more to see me again. Even if it meant giving up her own body. Thistle says I had a terrible nightmare and suddenly the saloon is full. Sid says, Fujik. Sid says, become bones. Stormy says. Star says watch out for the goblin bombs. Band-Aid says, Hissing Cat says, the what? Thistle says are you doing well? Sid says her the goblin bombs. Stormy says that's what I'm afraid of. I worry that I'll let my memories consume me. Corvoraptor says I'm holding on. Band-Aid says I am fucking Bombay. 273 says I do hope that this doesn't impact her position at the cafe. Thistle says, is that all you're doing? Matto 521 says, it won't. Sid says 07. KD is a slime UWU says memories can hurt. Real bad. But they're also important. It's really only up for you to decide if you want to remember. Band-Aid says A. Sid says incinerated. Corvoraptor says I. Triple X says did I just hear explosives? Sid says it was the goblin bombs. 273 says good. I would not want my issues getting in the way of what he wants to do. Sid says sorry slime apple. Stormy says yeah, it makes me worry about Mortis though. He's been sheltering these memories all on his own. We're twins, but I know he thinks of himself as my big brother. He wants to protect me. Thistle says don't worry, it's just stars the goblin bombs. Triple X says. Stormy says shouldering asterisk fuck. Triple X says I'm going back to bed. Underscore 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 says watch out for her the goblin bombs. Corvoraptor says, she does not know what to say AOJ guessed. Thistle says if you don't mind my asking, how long have you been alive, just about? Matto 521 says I just need to ask her why they knew about my place of living when we've never met before, that's all. Corvoraptor says about 20 years, which has been confirmed by a few tests. Star says I'm so sad the saloon can't hear my laughter RN. Star says it's so stupid. Corvoraptor says really very old for a crow. Thistle says I see. Would you like to know a fun fact? Corvoraptor says sure. Thistle says my age is, strictly speaking, a non-integer. Band-Aid says damn this sure is an abnormal cookie. Corvoraptor says do you mean, like, decimal points or something crazier than that? Matto 521 says but I dunno, If they're a friend of yours and she helped you out of a bind, then why would I fire him for that? Thistle says something crazier, of course. It's something I get a certain degree of entertainment talking about. Cappuccino says Star can make a server laughter noise. Cappuccino says play it when only one person is on. Cappuccino says jump scare. Corvoraptor says well, I think it's pretty interesting. Thistle says it's a consequence of how time flows in the Twilight Forest. It's not like it doesn't exist, for SE, but it doesn't really flow, either. Mars says Star should be allowed to hook her microphone up to the sound system server-wide. Corvoraptor says sounds like the idea of age would be pretty hard to keep track of there. Sid says more like a C. Thistle says that's a good way to think of it, Sid. 273 says I would not know. You people often confuse me with what choices you make, so I thought it important to check. Corvoraptor says interesting. Sid says moving just, not uniformly. Sid says I don't know. Katie is a slime UWU says don't worry too much about Mortys. If they really need to talk about the memories they can talk to me about M, in fact they already have, and when you want to remember I'm sure they'll gladly fill you in. Stormy says he, thank you, Katie W you take very good care of us. Thistle says this is mostly just to say, I've been alive in some form or another for a long time, and I assume you're planning to do the same, as well? Katie is a slime UWU says 3. Stormy says, laughing face. Corvoraptor says of course. Star says who's winning this staring contest? Corvoraptor says I'm pretty fucking lucky. Sid says L. Corvoraptor says I wouldn't want to waste what I have. Triple X says, oh by the way before I forget, can I have my name back? Stormy says well, no use standing out in the rain now. We'll get sick. Sid says you lost the staring contest. Band-Aid says. Sid says 07. Thistle says it feels like more than that to me, is all. Matto521 says people are a confusing mess, it's why I stick to myself so often. Band-Aid says he. Matto521 says been trying to fix that a bit but it's hard. Thistle says all this talk of mind battles and holding on has a way of making me worry, you know? Corvoraptor says Sid says goot. Band-Aid says just a bit. Band-Aid says carrot. Thistle says don't worry, I don't doubt you at all. Sid says shrug. Stormy says, ahhte goo penning. Thistle says and I won't press it, really. But as a young immortal, you have a lot to consider. Crow says sorry, that kinda happens sometimes. Band-Aid says I think I need to throw this hoodie in the washing machine. 273 says a common sentiment, people being confusing. But Band-Aid says I don't know what those are though. Band-Aid says people just keep telling me that. Corvoraptor says I suppose you have a lot more experience in that regard than I do. In addition to many other things. Sid says huh. Sid says oh. Band-Aid says we just have lava in the nether. Sid says to be fair. Sid says I haven't seen a washing machine here. Band-Aid says oh. 273 says it does seem worth it to understand. In some cases. Star says Band-Aid says damn. Star says where am I? Thistle says that may be true, but I still don't want to be patronizing. Corvoraptor says these people don't have very long, and I can't let it go to waste, you know? Band-Aid says welcome to saloon. Star says what the fuck? Corvoraptor says I have to do something. Sid says, KLFGJNHF. Sid says ERM. Sid says that was awkward. Matto521 says social stuff is always odd, you just need to find your crew. Band-Aid says kinda fucked up. Sid says rip I guess. Thistle says of course you do. I have a lot of hope for you in that regard. Band-Aid says 07. Corvoraptor says I just wish I could find something that I could actually do to help. Thistle says just be careful not to break yourself over your own knee, alright? Sid says anyways you could probably throw the hoodie in some river water? Corvoraptor says thank you. Sid says W some soap. Band-Aid says maybe. Sounds kinda cold. Sid says I need to wash my flannel too. Crow says, oh my god my footsteps mod has stance options. Sid says oh that's right. Sid says water probably bad. Sid says Crow says, quadrupedal, and such. Thistle says there is more to your existence than rescuing every living person in the world. That's all I wanted to say, really. Band-Aid says my hoodie would freeze when I get home. Sid says I mean I would think lava would work. Corvoraptor says. 273 says I have made a crew myself, it seems. At the very least, I can count a few as people I would want to speak to again. Sid says your jacket's not flammable. 273 says it may be only one hand of fingers, but that is more than I had before. Thistle says of course, I feel very similarly. A promise I made long ago. To make sure people get the chance to live normal lives? Band-Aid says I guess not. Matto521 says well that's progress then. Sid says good. Band-Aid says I/am/ from the nether. Sid says maybe lava will burn out the slop. Sid says I know. Band-Aid says oh. Maybe. Capacheetle says AAA new model. Corvoraptor says that's funny, I made a promise too. Capacheetle says OOC in Spetsidn wait. Corvoraptor says the person I made the promise to never got to hear it. Capacheetle says Ayafhur paywus. Band-Aid says, he. Capacheetle says you are sweater pants. Corvoraptor says and I'm sure he'd say I'm putting too much on myself, but Capacheetle says fucking spectacular. 273 says I suppose it is. Finding people alone to talk to for. Corvoraptor says I don't know. I don't want to be the lucky one all the time. 273 says lengthy periods of time seems to be my speciality. Band-Aids says, scary godmother time. Thistle says I personally just believe these sorts of promises we make apply to ourselves, too. Lodge80 says scary godmother, // Thistle says that's all. Corvoraptor says, thank you, Thistle. Matto521 says well, congrats you've done it again then. Thistle says of course. Thistle says you have thousands of years ahead of you. It's easy to get caught in the moment when you know other people don't have that luxury. Corvoraptor says yeah, I suppose. 273 says I do not think this is how you're supposed to meet and socialize with people, but it works. Band-Aids says, yes, scary godmother time. Corvoraptor says I just want this to mean something for people other than myself, you know? $273 says, oh thank God phone calls over suffering, dual wielding a call and RP is fucked. Thistle says I understand completely. In that case, being there for a person can also be as impactful as saving them, whatever you're saving them from. Matto521 says, oh well. Corvoraptor says I just never feel like I know what to say to help, most of the time. $273 says, I am fucking free anyways Wea. Corvoraptor says it feels like things just get worse and worse no matter what I do, and if I can't help anyone. Matto521 says hey if it works it works. Corvoraptor says, her skin quickly loses color. Crow says hey. Thistle says any given 20-year-old is not going to know what to say most of the time, much less when faced with things like, you know. Matto521 says sometimes you take stuff at your own pace. Thistle says vague gestures all this. Corvoraptor says I guess you're right, I just need to get better at it. Thistle says you'll make it. You'll help them. I'm certain. Just maybe not the way you're expecting. Though, despite that, I'm not a pessimist, either. $273 says if you do not mind me asking, where exactly is your cafe? I did not see it while I was wandering in this town, so I am rather curious. Crow says the world is always ending, and the end is always being averted, by love or foolishness or just plain old dumb luck. Neil Gaiman. Crow says everything changes, everything stays the same. Matto 521 says oh it's a bit out, I built it outside of the town. Thistle says I'm rather tired, but you're always welcome to talk to me about these things, little crow. Crow says and sometimes, it's real damn funny. Thistle says I have nothing but time. Matto 521 says as much as plenty of foot traffic sounds nice I dunno I prefer a smaller cozier place. Corvoraptor says of course, and thank you again for just being there. Thistle says see? It does help, after all. Thistle says, alright, I really need a nap. Corvoraptor says I kind of like being around people who are hard to kill, it's relieving. Corvoraptor says of course, take care of yourself. Crow says have you met Mist? Thistle says I am quite hardy, that's true. Thistle says don't be a stranger. Corvoraptor says of course. See you, Thistle. 273 says it is better for me as well. If I fit, of course. Corvoraptor says I have not really talked to Mist before, no. Matto 521 says, you might need to bend to fit through the door but. Crow says well, she's rather tough. Matto 521 says I think the seats are big enough. Doll says, smiley face. Doll says, laughing face. $273 says it isn't anything I am not used to. Corvoraptor says I've seen her around, and have heard of her exploits before, but I've never had the chance to properly talk, you know. Crow says yeah. Matto 521 says well, if you want I can show you where it is. Crow says I haven't talked much with her either, honestly. Crow says but we've interacted on occasion. 273 says I wouldn't mind the journey. Besides, a small cafe sounds like a step up from whatever I am doing now. 273 says for socializing, I mean. Matto 521 says sure. Well move quickly I think there's a ton of creatures outside. Crow says I think you two would get along. Corvoraptor says well, we have differing philosophies on some things. Corvoraptor says at least from what I've heard from her. Crow says MMM. Corvoraptor says I don't know if that would get in the way or not, of course, but there's a circumstance where I can only imagine ourselves standing against each other. Matto 521 says there it is. Capacheetle says I went AFK, what the fuck. Capacheetle says. Sid says hi. Band-Aid says carrot. Capacheetle says hi. Capacheetle says politely not commenting on how fucked up Sid is. Capacheetle says why are you drinking in my face? Sid says, SSSHHHH there fiana. Sid says it's good. Capacheetle says, cool. Matto 521 says well take a seat anywhere. Capacheetle says there are seats. Sid says yeah. 273 says I see what you mean by cozy now. Capacheetle says. Band-Aid says I like being high up. Capacheetle says a lot of people here do. Band-Aid says carrot. Capacheetle says I think if I got any higher up I'd put horn holes in the ceiling. Matto 521 says sorry it's of a tight fit, didn't really plan ahead. Triple X says, alright that's it for me tonight, have a wonderful tonight, and remember that you can call out sick if you turn purple. Matto 521 says, bit of a. Capacheetle says GN. Sid says, CYA. Band-Aid says I may have gotten stuck a couple of times. Hee. Cheddar says got back from being AFK, turned my camera to the left and scared myself with my own jump scare again. Corvoraptor says well, I feel like I'm prepared for a nightmare or two now after getting to talk to some people and chill out. I'll go ahead and call it a night. Capacheetle says God. I got stuck in so many doorways when I was getting used to having horns. Corvoraptor says see you around, Crow. 273 says not many people plan for. Well, anyone of my height. It is nothing to worry about. Band-Aid says you haven't always had them. Crow says see you around, Crow says you. Sid says he used to be like. Corvoraptor says yeah. Sid says human. Band-Aid says oh, huh. Capacheetle says yeah, fun trivia. Sid says no. Band-Aid says that's a new one. Sid says I know so many people who would kill to become an animal person. Capacheetle says I feel threatened being surrounded by two source people in my face/J. Sid says I didn't think it was possible. Matto521 says well, do you want anything? I don't really have any coffee in yet but I have some fish. Capacheetle says. When I was younger I probably would have done the same. Capacheetle says it's a weird situation anyway. Capacheetle says I had to almost die to become an animal. Capacheetle says so I don't think people would like that. Sid says you'd be surprised. Band-Aid says oh, huh. Band-Aid says I'm kind of an animal. 273 says I think I am fine. I cannot exactly taste it anyways. Band-Aid says actually. Crow says I'm already an animal. Matto521 says well. Band-Aid says are imps a kind of animal? Doll says 3. Sid says I guess. Or like a satyr or something, right? Capacheetle says aminal, smiley face. Sid says like half goat half something? Sid says you can be an animal if you want. Sid says it's a state of mind I think. Band-Aid says oh. Yeah. I'm a goat. Band-Aid says and a bat. Band-Aid says it's complicated. Shocking Shinks 12 says, I am now a threat. I am now running at 60 FPS. Band-Aid says I'm also made of fire, though. Sid says that's badass. Capacheetle says that is pretty cool. Band-Aid says hee hee thank you. Band-Aid says it wasn't great being born, though. (273) says I still appreciate the cafe even being here, even if I don't intend on eating much. Capacheetle says. Why would you have memories of being born? Sid says oh Sid says oh yeah. Band-Aid says I'm fucked up. Matto521 says well I don't mind as long as people enjoy it. Doll says, I hit the fucking painting. Band-Aid says I kind of just became. Imps are strange. Capacheetle says my fucking painting. Capacheetle says a. 273 says a place to take shelter that isn't simply a part of some big city is nice. Capacheetle says yeah. Capacheetle says wish I knew more about them, we didn't have imps in my nether. Capacheetle says I mean we had stuff similar I think. The more humanoid blazed things. Had horns sometimes. 273 says I do know there are others like me who consider themselves outcasts. Now, you can say they have a place to visit away from it all. Band-Aid says oh. Band-Aid says I can tell you some things. Band-Aid says if you want to hear. Cappuccino says oh hell yeah, go for it. Band-Aid says okay. In the nether that I'm from, imps are born of the elements. Matto521 says oh I feel that. Band-Aid says we all require heat, though, and if we get too cool, we burn out and die. Cappuccino says this feels like a good time to mention the closer you get to the counter/buttercup the warmer it gets. Cappuccino says he gets cold. Band-Aid says, AOUH. Cappuccino says, concernin', but you can like regulate body temperature right. Band-Aid says Sid says do you take trips to the nether sometimes? Band-Aid says well. Band-Aid says we kinda just. Sid says y'all have said it's cold here. Band-Aid says sit in lava. Band-Aid says it's very cold here. Cappuccino says oh, I thought that was just for fun. Cappuccino says it is cold. Sid says we're in the desert. Cappuccino says well not cold. Like. It's warm. Sid says it's like 90 out right now. Band-Aid says it's. Cappuccino says okay no that's cold. Band-Aid says that's hot. Matto521 says I've been an outcast for most of the time I've been here, it's only recently that people have given me a chance. Sid says where I'm from it is. Band-Aid says oh. Sid says it doesn't get much hotter than like 115 on a bad dating. Cappuccino says I was raised in the nether, so. Where I'm from it's not. Sid says and only in certain places. Sid says wow. Band-Aid says chilly. Cappuccino says 115 seems, okay. I ain't got like I'm not able to sit in fucking lava. Cappuccino says I just like it hotter than average. Band-Aid says carrot carrot. Band-Aid says one of my close friends is a water imp. Sid says yeah this place must be freezing in comparison to the nether. Sid says sheesh. Band-Aid says yeah. Very. Cappuccino says it's, et. Cappuccino says look that's why the air conditioning is over on the other side of the saloon and not here. 273 says I still am not sure what exactly their standards are. I used to not know even the basics of it all. Sid says y'all nether folks really should take a trip back sometime. Matto521 says everyone's got different ideals to M. Cappuccino says, maybe. Band-Aid says I want to. Sid says get some sun or nether equivalent. Cappuccino says all my friends live in the overworld. Band-Aid says there is no sun there. Carrot. Matto521 says even the most adamant folks that hated me have been okay recently. Sid says right. It's just the... Sid says turn of phrase.